The Galactic Council chambers had never felt so empty, despite being packed with representatives from over 300 species. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Collective adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus and watched the human delegation with growing unease. Something was different today. The humans sat with an unusual stillness, their faces carrying expressions he had learned to recognize over the past 50 years of cooperation, disappointment, mixed with grim determination. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's chief representative, stood slowly from her seat. The chamber, which moments before had buzzed with the typical pre-session chatter in dozens of languages, fell silent. Even the Hive Queen's translator drones stopped their constant humming. Elena's weathered face showed no emotion as she placed a simple datapad on the central podium. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "Today marks the end of humanity's participation in the Galactic Council." The statement hit the chamber like a plasma torpedo. Councillor Thrak of the Bruthan Empire, whose species had been humanity's closest allies in military matters, lurched forward in his seat, his massive form, standing nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor plating, trembled with confusion. "What madness is this, Elena? We have treaties, agreements, joint ventures spanning decades." Elena's expression remained unchanged. "All of which will be honored until their natural expiration. We will not renege on our commitments, but we will not be renewing them." The ethereal speaker, a being of pure energy housed in a containment suit, materialized beside the podium. Its voice resonated through quantum frequencies that bypassed the translation systems entirely, speaking directly to every mind present. "Humanity has been integral to our collective progress. Your species has contributed innovations in technology, medicine, and diplomatic solutions that have benefited all. This decision defies logic." "Logic, does it?" Elena asked quietly. She gestured to the datapad. "This contains a comprehensive record of the past 5 years. Every proposal humanity has made for reforming council policies, every suggestion for improving trade equality, every request for investigating the growing piracy in the Outer Rim, every plea for environmental protections in developing systems." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Do you know how many of these proposals received more than cursory consideration? 3. Do you know how many were actually implemented? 0. Councillor Vex of the Aquatic Federation, her gills fluttering with agitation, spoke through her water-filled communication sphere. "But these decisions require consensus. The Council operates on the principle of unanimous agreement for major changes, and therein lies the problem." Dr. Marcus Chen, humanity's chief scientist, said as he joined Elena at the podium. "When the Corvin plague threatened to wipe out 14 species 2 years ago, humanity proposed sharing our medical nanobots freely. The proposal was blocked because it might upset the balance of medical trade. 6 million beings died while we waited for consensus." The chamber erupted in defensive murmurs. Several delegates began speaking simultaneously in their native languages, creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones. Elena raised her hand, and the remarkable thing was that the noise actually subsided. Even in their anger and confusion, the Council still respected human authority. When the corporate cartels began strip-mining inhabited worlds in the Perseus Arm, Elena continued, "Humanity proposed intervention protocols. Blocked again. When slavers started operating openly in unclaimed space, using legal loopholes to traffic sentience, our enforcement proposals were deemed too aggressive. When climate refugees from 12 dying worlds needed immediate resettlement assistance, our aid package was reduced to thoughts and prayers, because providing real help might set a precedent." Fleet Admiral Sarah Knox, the third member of humanity's delegation, stepped forward. Her uniform bore the scars of countless battles fought in the name of Council peace. Every time there was actual danger, actual suffering that required immediate action. "Who did you call? When the Void Hunters emerged from dark space and started consuming entire star systems, who led the defense? When the rogue AI collective tried to digitize all organic life, who developed the countermeasures? When the interdimensional parasites began infecting trade routes, who sacrificed their fleets to contain them? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Because everyone knew the answers. In every crisis, when diplomacy failed and decisive action was needed, the galaxy had turned to humanity, not because humans were the strongest, dozens of species surpassed them in raw power. Not because they were the most advanced, their technology lagged behind several civilizations, but because humans possessed something the galaxy had grown to depend upon: the willingness to act when action was difficult. You called us reckless, Admiral Knox continued. You said we were too quick to violence, too eager for conflict. But when your worlds were burning, when your children were dying, when your entire way of life was threatened, you didn't call the wise ethereals or the logical synthetics. You called the reckless humans. Thrak's voice boomed across the chamber. Because we trusted you, because we knew you would answer. That is what allies do. Allies? Dr. Chen's laugh was bitter. Is that what we were? Because allies listen to each other. Allies compromise. Allies don't dismiss each other's concerns for decades and then act surprised when patience runs out. The Hive Queen's primary drone skittered forward, its multifaceted eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like tiny stars. The collective has always valued human input. Your species brings unique perspectives to our deliberations. Unique perspectives that are consistently ignored, Elena replied. Let me give you a recent example. 3 months ago, humanity presented evidence that the Merchant Guild was artificially inflating food prices in the outer colonies, causing widespread famine. We had data, witness testimonies, and documented proof of price-fixing conspiracies. The response? The Guild was asked to investigate themselves. She gestured to the viewing screen that dominated one wall of the chamber. While you were deliberating, we acted. Human relief ships have been delivering food to those colonies. Human medical teams have been treating malnutrition cases. Human engineers have been setting up agricultural infrastructure, all without council approval, because waiting for consensus meant watching people starve. The silence that followed was profound. Even the chamber's environmental system seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. So, what is this really about? The question came from an unexpected source. Delegate Zara of the nomadic clans, a species that rarely spoke in council sessions. You're angry that we don't rubber stamp your proposals? No, Elena said softly. We're tired of being the galaxy's emergency responders while being excluded from its decision-making. We're tired of watching preventable suffering because action might be inconvenient. We're tired of being called when the fires start but ignored when we suggest fire prevention. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or optical sensors or energy fields of each delegate. Humanity has always believed that with great power comes great responsibility. For 50 years, we've shouldered that responsibility for all of you. But responsibility without authority is just slavery, with extra steps. The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Delegates who had served alongside humans for decades began to understand the depth of frustration that had led to this moment. But understanding and accepting were different things. What would you have us do? The ethereal speaker's quantum voice carried a note of something that might have been desperation. Restructure the entire council system? Abandon the consensus protocols that have maintained peace for centuries? We've suggested reforms, Admiral Knox replied. Emergency action protocols. Majority voting on humanitarian issues. Independent oversight committees. Mandatory response timelines for crisis situations. Every single proposal was deemed too radical or potentially destabilizing. So instead, you destabilize everything by leaving? Vex's gills were now fluttering so rapidly, they created small whirlpools in her communication sphere. Dr. Chen activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a star map of human space over 200 systems connected by trade routes, defense networks, and communication relays. Humanity controls 12% of the galaxy's industrial capacity, 15% of its agricultural output, and 40% of its rapid response military capability. Our merchant fleets handle 30% of intersystem trade. Our research institutions have partnerships with virtually every major university and laboratory in council space. He paused to let the implications sink in. None of that disappears overnight. Existing contracts will be honored. Current research collaborations will continue until completion. But no new partnerships will be formed with council members. No new trade agreements. No new mutual defense pacts. This is blackmail, Thrak accused, his massive fists clenching. No, Elena corrected gently. Blackmail would be demanding something in exchange for staying. We're not demanding anything. We're simply choosing to leave. The distinction was crucial, and everyone in the chamber understood it. Humanity wasn't trying to force change through threats or ultimatums. They were walking away. The difference made their decision somehow more final, more irreversible. But where will you go? Asked Counselor Nim, of the Silicon Collective, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Humanity has been part of galactic civilization for half a century. You're integrated into everything. We'll manage, Elena replied simply. Humanity existed for thousands of years before we met you. We'll adapt. Admiral Knox stepped forward again. We're not becoming hermits or isolationists. We'll still trade with individual species. We'll still share scientific knowledge. We'll still help when asked directly. But we won't do it through the Council anymore. The implications were staggering. Without human rapid response fleets, who would handle the next interdimensional incursion? Without human agricultural surplus, how would the food-poor systems survive? Without human manufacturing capacity, who would build the ships and stations that kept civilization running? More importantly, without humanity's unique perspective, their strange combination of pragmatism and idealism, their willingness to take risks for moral principles who would push the galaxy toward progress when comfort was easier than change, you're abandoning us, whispered the Hive Queen through her drones. Just when we need you most. Elena's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the deep sadness beneath. We're not abandoning anyone. We're stopping the cycle where we're expected to clean up messes we're not allowed to prevent. You don't need us. You've convinced yourselves you don't need us for 50 years. She picked up the datapad and prepared to leave. Humanity's formal withdrawal will take effect at the end of this session. Our embassy staff will remain for 30 days to handle the transition. After that, if you need us, you know where to find us. But you'll be coming as visitors, not as allies making demands. As the human delegation gathered their materials and headed for the exit, the chamber remained frozen in stunned silence. Only as the doors closed behind them did the full weight of what had just happened begin to sink in. The galaxy had just lost its conscience, its emergency responders, and its most reliable allies all at once. And the worst part was, it had done so through its own stubborn refusal to change anything that might cause temporary discomfort. For the first time in decades, the Galactic Council faced a crisis they couldn't simply hand off to humanity to solve. They were going to have to figure out. 6 months had passed since humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. What had initially been dismissed as a temporary tantrum was revealing itself as a fundamental shift in the galaxy's power structure. Captain Jorik Thesman of the Zephyrian Deep Space Patrol stared at his scanner readings in disbelief. The merchant convoy they'd been tracking for 3 days had simply vanished, not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, as if the ships had never existed. This was the 5th disappearance in his sector this month, and his superiors were beginning to panic. Any sign of debris fields? He asked his tactical officer, though he already knew the answer. Negative, sir. Clean signatures, then nothing. Same pattern as the others. Jorik's mandibles clicked together nervously. In the old days, when something like this happened, the call would go out to the Human Rapid Response Fleet. Their specialized tracking ships could follow trails that other species' sensors couldn't detect. Their investigators had an uncanny ability to piece together evidence that seemed unrelated. Most importantly, their military units had the experience and equipment to handle whatever they found. But those days were over. The communication panel chimed with an incoming priority message. Jorik accepted the transmission, and the holographic form of Admiral Kethvar materialized on his bridge. The older Zephyrian looked haggard, his usually pristine crystalline breathing apparatus clouded with stress indicators. "Captain, we've received similar reports from 14 other sectors. The pattern is spreading. Sir, request permission to contact the human embassy for consultation." Admiral Kethvar's expression darkened. "Denied. The Council has forbidden any official requests for human assistance. With respect, Admiral, this is getting worse. Whatever's taking these ships, it's getting bolder." The last convoy had a full escort of Bruthan destroyers, which also vanished without a trace. Kethvar acknowledged grimly. "Continue your patrol, Captain. And pray we figure this out before it spreads to the core worlds." 3 sectors away, Dr. Silene Vorthak of the Aquatic Federation faced her own crisis. The research station orbiting Kepler 442b had gone dark 18 hours ago, taking with it 300 of the galaxy's most brilliant scientists and their families. The station's AI had sent a single, cryptic message before communications ceased. "The Deep Ones have awakened." Selene's gills fluttered rapidly as she reviewed the data for the 100th time. The station had been studying quantum resonance patterns in dead space, the vast, empty regions between galaxy clusters. For 2 years, they detected increasingly complex signals, patterns that suggested intelligence. The human scientists assigned to the project had been the first to suggest the signals might represent a form of communication. Those human scientists were now missing along with everyone else. "Director," her assistant swam closer, careful not to disturb the water currents around Silene's workstation. "The Council's Xenobiology Committee is requesting an update. Tell them what I've been telling them for the past 6 months," Silene replied bitterly. "Without human pattern recognition experts, we're flying blind. Their brains process complex data differently than ours. They see connections we miss." It was true, and everyone knew it. Human cognition was chaotic, unpredictable, and somehow capable of making intuitive leaps that left other species' logical thought processes behind. In a crisis requiring creative solutions, humans were irreplaceable. "Ma'am, perhaps if we made an unofficial inquiry?" "To what end?" Silene's voice carried the weight of her frustration. "Even if the humans agreed to help, the Council would censure us. And after the way we treated them, why would they want to help us at all?" The question hung in the water between them, unanswered because both knew the truth. The galaxy had taken humanity's assistance for granted for so long that they'd forgotten it was a choice, not an obligation. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, the situation was deteriorating even faster. Without human patrol fleets supplementing Council forces, piracy had exploded. The sophisticated criminal networks that humanity had spent decades dismantling were rebuilding themselves with alarming speed. Captain Rex Holloway of the independent freighter Lucky Strike ducked behind a cargo container as plasma bolts seared the air around him. His ship had been intercepted by raiders while carrying medical supplies to a plague-stricken colony, supplies that the Galactic Council had deemed non-essential, but that humans had been quietly providing anyway. "This wouldn't have happened 6 months ago," Rex muttered to his co-pilot, a young Corvan named Tesk. The pirates knew better than to operate in human patrol zones. Tesk's fur bristled with fear as another volley of shots rang out. "Why did the humans really leave, Captain?" "The official reports make no sense." Rex popped up to return fire with his pulse rifle. "Because they got tired of being the galaxy's janitors, kid. You think it's a coincidence that everything's falling apart right after they walked away? It wasn't just crime that was spiraling out of control. The vast network of humanitarian aid that humanity had coordinated was crumbling. Food shipments to impoverished worlds were months behind schedule. Medical supplies sat in warehouses while bureaucrats debated distribution protocols. Refugee camps overflowed with displaced beings who had nowhere else to go. On the Council homeworld of Nexus Prime, the situation was becoming politically explosive. Emergency sessions were called daily. But without human mediators, negotiations devolved into chaos. Species that had coexisted peacefully for decades were suddenly at each other's throats over resource allocation and territorial disputes. Councillor Thrak paced his quarters like a caged predator. His massive frame barely fit in the space designed for average-sized beings. But physical discomfort was the least of his concerns. Reports from the front lines painted a picture of systematic collapse. The door chimed, and Thrak granted entry to his aide, a younger Bruthan named Gorak. "Sir, the emergency defense meeting has been postponed again. Let me guess." Thrak growled. "The ethereals are still insisting on a measured response to the missing convoys, while the aquatics want to form a study committee. Actually, sir, the synthetics have proposed creating an algorithmic solution to optimize patrol routes, but the Biological Alliance claims artificial intelligence can't properly understand organic behavior patterns." Thrak's roar of frustration rattled the windows. "And while they debate, more ships disappear, more colonies go dark, more beings die." He turned to face his aide. "Contact the human embassy." Unofficially, Gorak's eyes widened. "Sir, the Council specifically prohibited. The Council can discipline me later. Right now, I need to know if humanity would even consider helping us if we asked properly." 2 hours later, Thrak sat across from Ambassador Maria Santos in the human embassy's reception area. The space was notably sparse. Most of humanity's diplomatic staff had already departed, leaving only a skeleton crew to handle the transition. Santos was younger than her predecessors, but her eyes held the weight of recent events. She listened without interruption as Thrak outlined the escalating crises across the galaxy. "So," she said finally, "you want to know if we would help if you asked nicely?" Thrak's pride bristled, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I want to know what it would take for humanity to reconsider their withdrawal." Santos leaned back in her chair. "Counselor, do you know what the first human emergency response was after we left the Council?" No. A Zephyrian mining colony sent a direct distress call. Seismic instability was threatening to collapse their underground city. They couldn't wait for Council disaster relief protocols. We had rescue ships there in 18 hours and evacuated 30,000 beings. Thrak was silent, processing this information. The second emergency was a synthetic computational virus that was causing logic loops in their collective consciousness. They asked us directly for help. Our cybersecurity experts had it contained within 6 hours. She stood and walked to the window overlooking Nexus Prime's sprawling cityscape. "Do you see the pattern, Counselor?" They asked directly instead of going through the Council. Thrak said slowly. "Exactly. We never stopped wanting to help. We stopped wanting to be taken for granted. We stopped wanting to be the galaxy's unpaid emergency service, while being shut out of decisions that create those emergencies." Santos turned back to face him. "Every crisis you've mentioned, the disappearing ships, the awakening entities in deep space, the resurgent piracy. Humanity predicted these problems months or years ago. We proposed preventive measures that were dismissed as premature or too expensive." "So what would it take?" Thrak asked again. "That's not the right question," Santos replied gently. "The right question is, what are you willing to change? Because we're not coming back to the same system that drove us away in the first place." As if summoned by their conversation, Santos's communication device chimed with an urgent message. Her expression grew grave as she read it. "What is it?" Thrak asked. "The research station at Kepler 442b. We've been monitoring the situation. Our xenobiology experts think they know what happened. And?" Santos met his eyes. "The entities they contacted aren't from this dimension. They're not even hostile, they're trying to communicate. But their form of communication is so alien that it drives most species into catatonic states. The missing scientists aren't dead. They're trapped in a feedback loop, trying to process thoughts that their minds aren't equipped to handle." Thrak leaned forward. "Can humanity help them?" "We think so. We've developed some theoretical countermeasures, but implementing them would require access to the research station's quantum resonance arrays, which means sending a team into the affected zone. A suicide mission. Maybe. Or maybe not. Humans have a unique neurological flexibility that other species lack. We might be able to maintain our sanity long enough to shut down the resonance field and free the trapped scientists." Thrak stared at her. "You would do this? Even after everything?" Santos smiled sadly. "Counselor, that's what you never understood about humanity. We don't help people because we expect something in return. We help because it's the right thing to do. The question is, will the Council let us? The implications hit Thrak like a physical blow. Even now, faced with catastrophic losses and escalating crises, the bureaucratic machinery of the Council would probably debate any rescue mission for months. Forms would need to be filed, committees consulted, risk assessments conducted, legal implications reviewed. By the time they finished deliberating, the trapped scientists would be dead or permanently insane. What if, Thrak began slowly, what if some of us acted independently? Not as Council representatives, but as individuals who wanted to save lives. Santos studied him carefully. That would be politically dangerous for you. The Council wouldn't approve of members working outside official channels. Let me worry about politics, Thrak said firmly. Can you mount a rescue mission with unofficial support? We already have ships on standby, Santos admitted. We've been preparing ever since the station went dark. But we need someone with Council access codes to get past the security perimeter. Thrak stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the room. You'll have them within the hour. As he prepared to leave, Santos called after him. Counselor, you should know. Humanity isn't angry with the galaxy. We're disappointed. There's a difference. Explain. Anger burns out. Disappointment changes how you see the world forever. Thrak nodded slowly and left, carrying with him the weight of understanding how much the galaxy had truly lost when humanity walked away. And more importantly, how much they might lose if they couldn't find a way to change. To do next, by themselves. The rescue mission to Kepler 442b had been a turning point that nobody saw coming. When the human strike team successfully penetrated the dimensional anomaly and extracted the trapped scientists, the galaxy witnessed something it had forgotten was possible. Decisive action that saved lives without months of committee meetings. Commander Sarah Chen, no relation to Dr. Marcus Chen from the original delegation, stood on the bridge of the HSV Determination as her team reviewed the mission data. The scientists they'd rescued were still in medical facilities, slowly recovering from their exposure to alien thought patterns. But all 300 were alive and expected to make full recoveries. Captain, her communications officer called out, we're receiving transmission requests from 47 different worlds, all asking for direct assistance with various crises. Sarah wasn't surprised. Word had spread quickly through unofficial channels that humanity was still willing to help those who asked directly. More importantly, the galaxy was learning that sometimes the old ways of doing things simply didn't work. Back on Nexus Prime, Counselor Thrak faced the political consequences of his unauthorized cooperation with humanity. He stood before the full Council assembly, his normally impressive bearing diminished by the weight of the censure proceedings against him. You violated your oath to this council, declared the ethereal speaker, its quantum voice resonating with disappointment. You provided classified access codes to a non-council entity and facilitated an unauthorized military operation. I saved 300 lives, Thrak replied firmly. Lives that would have been lost if we had followed standard council protocols. The statement sent ripples through the assembled delegates. Everyone knew it was true. The council's emergency response procedures would have taken weeks to authorize a rescue mission, by which time the trapped scientists would have died from exposure to the dimensional entities. Counselor Vex of the Aquatic Federation spoke from her water-filled sphere. The precedent you've set is dangerous, Thrak. If every delegate begins acting unilaterally, then maybe things will actually get done, interrupted a new voice. All heads turned as Delegate Zara of the nomadic clans stood up. The normally quiet representative rarely spoke in council sessions, making her intervention all the more significant. Continue, delegate, the ethereal speaker prompted. Zara stepped into the center of the chamber. My people have lived in the spaces between civilizations for millennia. We've watched empires rise and fall. Do you know what kills galactic governments? Not war, not plague, not even economic collapse. Paralysis. The inability to act when action is needed. She gestured toward the viewing screen, which displayed a real-time map of current galactic crises. Red dots marked locations of pirate attacks, Yellow indicated humanitarian emergencies, and blue showed technological disasters. The map was covered in colored markers. 6 months ago, when humanity was part of this council, how many of these crises would have already been resolved? The question hung in the air because everyone knew the answer. Most of them: human rapid response teams, human diplomatic corps, human logistics networks. They had formed the backbone of the galaxy's crisis management system. Dr. Silene Vorthak swam forward in her environmental suit. The humans made their choice. We cannot force them to return. No, Zara agreed. But we can ask ourselves why they left. And more importantly, we can ask whether we're willing to change. The Hive Queen's primary drone skittered closer. Change is difficult. The consensus-based system has maintained peace for centuries. Has it? Zara challenged. Or has it maintained the illusion of peace while pushing the burden of actual problem-solving onto those willing to act? She activated a holographic display showing statistical data. In the past 50 years, who has responded to the most emergency situations? Who has contributed the most humanitarian aid? Who has developed the most solutions to galactic-scale problems? The data was undeniable. Humanity, representing less than 3% of the galaxy's population, had been responsible for nearly 40% of emergency responses and over 60% of innovative crisis solutions. They didn't leave because they were angry, Zara continued. They left because they were exhausted, and because we never listened to their suggestions for preventing these crises in the first place. Meanwhile, in human space, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The emergency session was being held aboard the HSV Unity, humanity's mobile capital ship that served as their primary diplomatic and military command center since their withdrawal from the Council. President Elena Vasquez, the former ambassador, had been elected to lead humanity's new independent government, reviewed reports from across the galaxy. Despite officially withdrawing from galactic affairs, humanity found itself busier than ever, responding to direct requests for assistance. The irony is almost amusing, commented Dr. Marcus Chen, now serving as humanity's Minister of External Affairs. We're helping more people now than we did as council members, because we can act immediately instead of waiting for permission, replied Admiral Knox, who had taken charge of humanity's new independent response fleet. When the Corvon plague outbreak hit 3 systems last week, we had medical ships on site within hours. If we'd still been in the council, we'd probably still be debating whether to classify it as a regional health concern or a potential pandemic. President Vasquez nodded. The question is sustainability. We can't be the galaxy's emergency service forever. Eventually, other species need to develop their own rapid response capabilities. Some are trying, Dr. Chen noted. The Bruthan Empire has been building up their crisis response teams. The Zephyrians are developing new tracking technologies. Even the synthetics are creating more flexible decision-making algorithms. But it's not enough, Admiral Knox said bluntly. They're trying to copy our methods without understanding the principles behind them. You can't bureaucratize emergency response. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Captain Maria Santos, who had been serving as humanity's unofficial liaison with individual council members. Her face appeared on the main screen, and her expression was serious. Mr. President, we have a situation. The council is fracturing. Explain, Vasquez said. Delegate Zara's speech has triggered a cascade reaction. Several species are questioning the consensus system openly. The Bruthan Empire is threatening to withdraw if emergency response reforms aren't implemented immediately. The Aquatic Federation is proposing a complete restructure of the Council's decision-making process. And the others? Split. About half support reform, a quarter want to maintain the status quo, and the remainder are waiting to see which way the wind blows. President Vasquez exchanged glances with her advisors. What's your assessment, Maria? I think the Council is finally ready to listen. Really listen. But they need guidance on how to implement changes without destroying the entire system. And they want us to provide that guidance? Unofficially, yes. Several delegates have reached out through back channels. They're admitting that the current system doesn't work and asking for help designing something better. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was the opportunity humanity had been hoping for, not to return to the old system, but to help create something new, something that balanced the stability of consensus with the flexibility needed for effective action. 3 weeks later, representatives from 43 species gathered in an unprecedented informal conference on the neutral world of Haven Prime. It wasn't an official council session; those were still paralyzed by procedural debates. Instead, it was a working group focused on practical solutions to galactic governance. The meeting was moderated jointly by Delegate Zara and President Vasquez, an arrangement that would have been impossible under the old system. The humans were present not as members seeking readmission, but as consultants helping to design new approaches to collective decision-making. The problem, explained Dr. Chen during his presentation, isn't consensus itself. It's the requirement for unanimous consensus on all issues, regardless of their urgency or scope. His holographic display showed a proposed tiered system. Emergency responses require only majority approval from affected region representatives. Humanitarian aid requires a 2/3 majority. Major policy changes still require extensive consensus, but with defined timeframes for debate. Councillor Thrack raised his hand. What about oversight? How do we prevent the abuse of emergency powers? Mandatory review after the fact, Admiral Knox replied. Emergency actions are taken first, justified later. If the justification is inadequate, those responsible face consequences. But people don't die while committees debate. The ethereal speaker manifested beside the podium. This system would require fundamental changes to our legal structure, our military protocols, our trade agreements. Yes, President Vasquez said simply. Change is hard, but stagnation is harder. And the cost of inaction is measured in lives. Over the following days, the working group hammered out details of what became known as the Haven Accords. The new system maintained the Council's basic structure while introducing flexibility for crisis response. Emergency protocols were streamlined. Humanitarian aid was removed from bureaucratic control. And a new rapid response authority was created with rotating leadership among all member species. Most importantly, the new system included provisions for including non-council entities in emergency operations. Humanity wouldn't return as a formal member, but they would work alongside the reformed council as partners rather than subordinates. The signing ceremony was held under Haven Prime's triple moons, with representatives from across the galaxy witnessing the birth of a new era in galactic governance. As President Vasquez signed humanity's participation agreement, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Delegate Zara approached after the ceremony. You could have forced this years ago. Humanity had enough influence to demand these changes. Vasquez smiled. Forced change doesn't last. Change has to come from within, from the recognition that something better is possible. And if the old council had refused to change, then they would have faced the consequences of their choices. Systems that can't adapt eventually collapse under their own weight. As the delegates dispersed to carry news of the Haven Accords back to their home systems, the galaxy began the slow process of learning to respond to crises with the speed they demanded, rather than the comfort bureaucracy preferred. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Old habits died hard, and some species struggled to adapt to the new reality where action was valued over procedure. But gradually, the galaxy developed something it had lost over centuries of gradual bureaucratization: the ability to respond quickly and decisively to threats and suffering. Humanity had walked away not in anger, but in the hope that their absence would force the galaxy to confront its own limitations. In the end, the lesson learned was simple but profound. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose something before you truly understand its value. The galaxy had learned the true meaning of loss not through humanity's departure, but through the recognition of what they had been taking for granted all along. And in that recognition, they found the motivation to become something better than they had been before. Years later, when historians studied this period, they would note that the greatest service humanity ever performed for galactic civilization was not the crises they resolved or the innovations they contributed. It was teaching the galaxy that sustainable cooperation required more than just good intentions. It required the courage to change when change was needed, even when change was uncomfortable. The universe was a dangerous place, filled with threats that required immediate action and suffering that demanded swift response. The galaxy had finally learned to match its noble ideals with the practical ability to act on them. And in doing so, they had created something that was truly worth preserving.